Horror story. There was a house at the end of Mill Street. You know the type, the one that everyone in town whispers about but no one dares to investigate. It had stood there for as long as I could remember, but what set it apart from every other creaky, dilapidated home were the sounds. Unmistakable and deeply unsettling sounds that no one could quite describe but always felt wrong. At night, especially during the warmer months when the windows were cracked open to let in a breeze, you'd hear it. A low, guttural rumbling that morphed into scraping or wailing, never quite the same but always carrying an edge of something unfamiliar. Everyone in town avoided the place not just because of the sounds, but because of the woman who lived there. People said she was ancient, older than anyone else in the town. She hadn't been seen in over a decade, and even then only fleeting glimpses through grimy windows. The stories about her were as unsettling as the sounds. Some said she had survived unimaginable horrors, and her time was spent trying to keep whatever had followed her from escaping the house. Others whispered that it wasn't something from her past she was holding back. It was something she had summoned. But if I'm being honest, that's what drew me to it. That unspoken fear that everyone else ran from felt like a challenge to me. I had always lived on the edge of danger, flirting with the macabre, the unknown. If there was a way to test my nerves, this was it. It was the first week of June. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, and the sky was awash in that deep purplish hue that comes right before the night swallows everything. The air was warm, almost uncomfortably so, making my skin feel slick with a light layer of sweat. I stood on the cracked pavement in front of the house, my heart pounding harder than I'd ever admit. It wasn't fear, or at least that's what I told myself. It was anticipation. The kind that makes your hands itch and your throat dry. The house looked worse up close. The wood siding was splintered and peeling, long abandoned by any sense of care or upkeep. A few of the windows were boarded up, but others were left exposed, though coated so thickly in grime that they were practically opaque. There was no light from inside. The whole place felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for me to make the first move. A sudden gust of wind swept through the narrow street, bringing with it the faintest echo of that sound. It wasn't loud, not yet. But I heard it, a soft, scratching noise that seemed to scrape against my mind rather than my ears. It made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. But I couldn't stop now. I could feel the weight of the town's legends pressing down on me as I approached the front steps. They creaked loudly under my weight, almost like they were warning me to turn back. But that was never my style. I reached for the tarnished doorknob, expecting resistance, but the door swung open almost effortlessly, the hinges groaning in protest. Inside, the air was thick and heavy, like it hadn't been disturbed in years. Dust motes floated through the air, catching the last slivers of twilight that streamed through the grimy windows. The smell hit me next. It wasn't just musty, it was damp, like something had been rotting beneath the surface for years. My stomach churned, but I pushed it down. The house was silent, save for the faint creaks of old wood settling around me, but I knew it was there, whatever it was. That thing everyone in town was too scared to describe, too frightened to name. It lived here, in these walls, beneath the floorboards, behind the darkened windows. Suddenly, a sound broke the oppressive silence. A soft, rhythmic thumping from somewhere deep within the house. It was slow at first, almost too faint to be noticeable, but as I stood frozen, it grew louder. A heartbeat maybe. Or the echo of something trying to escape its confinement. I didn't know, and I wasn't sure I wanted to. I took a step inside, the wooden floor groaning beneath my weight, and as I did, I realized something. This was no ordinary house. There was something watching me. I could feel it, like eyes pressing into my skin, unseen but undeniable. And the sound, that awful, unnameable sound, was growing louder. I hadn't even made it past the entryway when I heard it, the unmistakable shuffle of feet on the floor above me. Slow, deliberate, as if whoever or whatever was up there knew I had arrived. Knew that I had finally taken the challenge. I should have turned around then. I should have left and joined the rest of the town in their silent agreement to leave this place alone. But something about that sound, something about the house, drew me in further. The grandmother they spoke of, the one who hadn't left the house in 10 years, she was up there. Or at least, something that had once been her. And tonight, I was going to find out what secrets this house had been hiding all these years. The door behind me slammed shut with a deafening bang. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. Because in that moment, I realized I was no longer alone. Something was waiting for me in the dark, and it had been waiting for a long, long time. I don't know what kept me moving forward after that door slammed shut behind me. Maybe it was pride, or maybe something far darker. Either way, turning back wasn't an option now. I had committed to this, and whether it was adrenaline or sheer madness guiding me, I stepped deeper into the house. The air grew heavier with each breath, as if it were thickening around me, wrapping itself around my lungs like a damp cloth. The faint heartbeat-like thumping that echoed from above seemed to synchronize with my own pulse. I could almost feel it under my skin. My hand instinctively reached for the flashlight I had neglected to bring. I cursed myself under my breath. A tactical flashlight would have cut through the suffocating darkness that now surrounded me. But there was no time for regret. I swallowed hard and pressed on. The house seemed to breathe with me, groaning and settling like an old beast disturbed from its slumber. The wooden floor beneath my feet creaked in protest with each step, but it wasn't just the floor. There was a rhythm to it, footsteps. Not mine. They were behind me, above me, all around me, as if someone, or something, was moving through the house with me. But when I paused, they did too. I reached the base of the stairs. They spiraled up into the gloom, disappearing into the inky blackness of the second floor, which supposedly didn't exist anymore. The story said the upper floor had collapsed years ago, the rafters rotted and the roof caved in during some forgotten storm. But there was no denying the fact that someone, was up there. I could hear it. Shuffling, dragging footsteps, sometimes slow, sometimes quick, moving in jagged patterns as if whoever, or whatever, it was didn't have the strength to walk properly. I shouldn't have gone up there. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around and leave. But I didn't. My body was moving on its own, driven by that same unnatural pull that had drawn me to the house in the first place. My hand rested on the banister, slick with something wet. I grimaced and wiped it on my pants, but the damp feeling lingered, like it had seeped into my skin. The stairs creaked under my weight, the noise cutting through the silence like a blade. The higher I climbed, the louder the footsteps became, as if they were matching my pace. Then just as I reached the landing, the footsteps stopped. My breath caught in my throat. The air here was colder, damp, almost like the atmosphere of a forgotten basement or a flooded cave. The walls glistened faintly, and as I reached out, I realized why. They were wet. Not just damp, but slick with moisture that dripped down in slow, irregular patterns. The wallpaper, long since peeled away in most places, was bubbled and warped from years of decay. Mold bloomed in patches, dark and sickly, the stench of rot thick in the air. I should have turned back then. I wanted to turn back. But something kept me rooted to the spot, a force pulling me further into the darkness. I stepped forward, deeper into the narrow hallway. The walls seemed to close in around me, the ceiling lower, the floor softer underfoot, like it wasn't quite solid anymore. I felt like I was walking into the mouth of something ancient and hungry. The sounds around me shifted, wet, squelching noises like something slithering through the walls. Every step I took echoed with a wet, squelching reverberation, like the house itself was alive, breathing around me, waiting for me to make a mistake. Then I heard it, a sharp intake of breath. Not mine. It came from somewhere ahead, just out of sight. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. The hallway stretched before me, narrowing as it went, disappearing into the shadows. And then I saw it. At the far end of the hallway, barely illuminated by the faintest sliver of dying twilight that managed to creep through the broken windows, something stood. It was hunched over, its back to me, wearing what looked like a long white nightgown. The fabric clung to its body, soaked through, as if it had just crawled out of some forgotten well or emerged from a rainstorm that hadn't touched the outside world in years. Its hair was long, stringy, and black, dripping with water that pooled at its feet. The air around it seemed colder, more oppressive. I could feel my breath catching in my throat as my eyes locked onto the figure. It wasn't moving, but I could sense it breathing, the rise and fall of its thin, frail shoulders slow and deliberate. I should have turned around. I should have run. But my legs felt like they were frozen in place, locked by some unseen force. And then it moved. The figure didn't turn. It didn't need to. It began to twitch, just slightly at first, like something was waking up inside it. Then, all at once, it jerked violently, its body twisting in unnatural angles as it rose to its full height. The wet slapping sound of its bare feet on the floor echoed through the hallway, and before I could react, it started to run. It rushed at me with a speed that defied explanation, its wet hair whipping around its face, though I couldn't see its eyes, only the mouth open wide in a silent scream. I tried to move, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. The sound of its footsteps, wet and rapid, grew louder, closer, pounding in my ears like a drumbeat of impending doom. In an instant it was on me. It hit me with such force that I felt the wind knocked from my lungs and I was thrown back, my head slamming into the floor. I tried to scream, but the air was gone from my chest, my vision swimming as the world around me blurred into a dizzying haze. The last thing I saw before everything went black was the figure looming over me, its wet, icy fingers gripping my throat. And then, nothing. The next thing I knew, there was silence. Deafening, all-encompassing silence. The house, the creature, the wet, suffocating air, it was all gone. I was floating in darkness, weightless, and for a moment I thought maybe I was dead. But then the darkness shifted. It wasn't emptiness anymore. It was something else. Someone else. I could feel it, watching me from the void, waiting for me to wake up, waiting for me to remember. And that's when I realized, no one would see me again.